I was hoping to give everyone a proper, full-on update on the Clean It, Cut It, Fill It. I've had some figures back from the Clean It, which I've queried because they seem to be quite large. I just want to make sure we're not saying we're collecting a lot more rubbish off the streets than we are, so I should get that back for tomorrow. However, Cut It. We've cut an extra 1,300 acres of grass in 100 days than was planned. That's the size of 3 Hyde Parks, which is quite significant. And considering where we were when we took administration, 60 officers in the environment team down, equipment that wasn't working, hadn't been serviced, or didn't have staff that were qualified to use it, and actually some of it being sold. I think it's a testament to our officers that have really pulled out all the stops on this, so a big thank you to them. They're the ones that have made it happen. Thank you to Pauline for making sure from the top down it's working. Sorry? Oh, sorry, and of course some of the equipment was left unrepaired, so we couldn't use it. But they really have pulled out stops on that. I know not everybody's happy. You know, it's one of those things. You cut the grass 3 weeks later, it's much taller than it was sometimes. And sometimes bits are missed, but where we were getting complaints sent to us as councillors saying, yeah, this hasn't been cut for months, this hasn't been cut for a significant amount of time. Steve Cox and I went out to find grass in a park in Slip of Clays that was way past my knee and was rendering parts of it unusable. That's not so much the case now. So as soon as I get the Clean It ones, I'll be a little bit happier, get them confirmed. Moving on to Fill It, nearly 5,000 road defects have been repaired. That's a significant amount. Again, you know, there are still potholes in the road. There's potholes in the road at the end of my road. There are potholes still all over the borough, but we are making a difference. Again, as I say, residents emailing us that were complaining at the beginning of the administration, this hadn't been done, that hadn't been done, and now emailing us saying thank you, we see the difference. And we see it in our area, but we also see it in other areas that we are travelling to across the borough. When we took administration, where we had unlawful encampments that seemed to be moving in some sort of game of pass the parcel from one place to another, to another, to another within the borough, taking anything up to 10, 12 days to move along. That's not so much the case. We still have some that fall below the threshold of Section 61, but all those that are meeting Section 61 criteria for the police, we're working very close with the police. We're taking a much more robust action, and we're actually moving some of them on in hours rather than days or in weeks, which is a real step forward for both the local authority and the police. Police are telling us they feel empowered. They feel that they've got, you know, they're actually making a difference. Residents are saying this is really great. They're actually, you know, they're being moved on fairly quickly. There are other conversations we need to have to make sure there is provision. But again, that's a Greater Essex conversation I'll be having in the not too distant future. But it really does show working in partnership with the police really does make a difference. And again, off to a rocky start, but one conversation has led to a massive improvement. So again, my thanks to not only the Police and Crime Commissioner, but also the officers on the ground that are making this happen. Not all successes. Obviously, Grays Beach has been out of action, or some of the play equipment has been out of action all the summer because of flooding from a culvert that's been blocked open. We're keeping pressure on angling water. It's unfair. You know, the number of times I went over the park and you see families go over there and walk away because, you know, there's just nothing the kids can use to play in the big sand pit there. So we're putting pressure on angling water to make sure that not only is it fixed, that there's some remedy in place. The lay-bys on the 1089, again, we're putting pressure on both Highways England and the government to say these need to close. Highways England said they should close. They made an application to close them, and then they backtracked on it. Just last night, I got an email from residents saying that there were 3 or 4 vehicles overhanging the end of the lay-bys, causing it very difficult for traffic, and that's just not fair on our regular road users. It is it's a very important road. It feeds out Hull. Our Hull feeds the rest of the nation. We can't have it that the road's impassable, and more importantly, the road's an absolute tip where the drivers have got no respect for Thurrock residents or indeed the area in which they're parked up overnight. It's just not fair. A nice touch, Friday is at the Beehive between 6:30 and 8:30. There is a Can Soup Save the World event. It's £5 a head. Unfortunately, I have a previous engagement, but I would obviously urge all councillors that can make it and residents who can make it to go along. Obviously, the £5 is to help make a difference and see if we can actually change the world from small groups of funding in this way. Finally, obviously, a lot of the stuff we've seen over the past 100 days has been it's going in the right direction, or it's been a bit upsetting, it's not clear. But Monday we'll see a year that we've had the new Chief Executive, Lynn Carpenter. So we've made a year, well done. It is obviously it's a bit of a step change, it's a bit of a difference, and I think we're all going in the same direction, we're all going in the right direction. So let's look forward to get another year or more with you as the Chief Executive.
Active maintenance towards a preventative approach using analytical techniques. This will allow us to minimise the need for emergency intervention and focus on methods which reduce uncontrolled deterioration of our highways. In conjunction with this, our network will be examined regularly so that maintenance works can be planned when they are most cost effective to undertake. This fits in well with our Clean It, Cut It and Fill It campaign by allowing us to take the next steps towards sustaining our improvements and improving our residents' journeys. The Department of Transport has produced these guidelines and is incentivising participation in the programme. So in summary, this proposal has a number of positive outcomes for Thurrock Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lip. Members, do you have any questions for Councillor Lyons? Losing significant funding from government. I'm surprised that actually we haven't been moving towards this before. There is there's one thing I noticed in one of the appendices, the number of street lights. I can't find it at the moment. We've got down to 1,500. I think it's actually 17,000. So we might want to correct that. And there's also reference to on page 19. The 2012 HMP pothole review, prevention, preventive and cure. I noticed as you go through the appendices there are some references to that. Do you know if this was actually fully adopted after this was issued? I know it's before our administration, but whether or not it's been. I'm sorry, I can't answer. Okay. I'll find it. Steve?
I think it was adopted, but I can provide clarification.
It doesn't seem clear from the document whether we did that we had adopted it or whether we sort of adopted some of it. But clearly, obviously, we've not want to put our government taxpayers' money coming back to us from government at risk by not having adopted it before. But other than that, with no other questions, we've got the two recommendations here, which is to approve the HMP efficiency principles approach towards highway infrastructure and asset management.
Review on the medium-term and long-term financials of the organisation being the council. It also reports back the piece of work that we've undertaken in terms of the reserves review. The recommendation is noted within, and I'll go through that shortly. Furthermore, it also confirms the mechanism for the facilitation of the bottom-up reshaping of services, now known as the council spending review. So in summary, that's what the report is going through. So if I take us over to page 142, members and cabinet colleagues will only be too aware that the general fund budget was agreed back in February 16. There was also a further 3.4 million identified at the same period around the base budget work, and targets of 0.75 million in terms of income generation were also set at that particular piece. Now, looking at where we are year to date, we are at 2.6 million across the 3.4 million savings target. So there is about 600,000 short, but I'll go into that shortly. That 600,000 feeds into the variance from budget report on the table on page 143. So just for clarity, we entered with 80.6 million worth of pressures. you'll see that there has been the growth allocation of 4.5 million, and overall what it does is, with the mitigating action, which is the column just by one from the right, that mitigating action gets us to the 0.158 million, where we're currently projected to overspend. Now, we have to achieve that mitigation plan. 0.158 million, obviously, we need to bridge, and we will bridge. For clarity, clean it, cut it, fill it is in the revised variance column on the far right of the table on page 143. Officers are already working away and nearly finalised plans in terms of around mitigation around that, but there is the obvious opportunity of capitalising MRP to fund that. Point of note, the clean it, cut it, fill it piece was a pilot leader. Obviously we need to take a longer term view, and I'll go on to that shortly. So moving on to the individual directorate reports, as you'll see from section 3.1, there's a number of different reports by directorate which give a fully furnished answer as to where each budget is across the organisation. So obviously this report is expecting to see a 1.125 growth pressure environment moved over. Councillor Sue Little is doing a heck of a lot of work in children's social care to recover some of that overspend, and that contributes to that. So cabinet members can take a view on their own budgets in terms of their own directorates and cabinet portfolios. In terms of my own, in terms of finance, so finance is currently coming at around £400,000 worth of saving, and a lot of that is through income generation. So one example is the fraud team doing some work at Castle Point. That's just one example. Human resources was showing a variance of 120,000. This is a bit of a wooden dollars argument where 120,000 was taken out of the public health spend around occupational health, and therefore entered its way back into the HR and OD budget. And through payroll services, sales, and more program revenue activity leader, we have managed to bring that revised variance down to zero. Legal services, very pleased with legal services. They've set an additional income target of £200,000 this year, which, as you'll see from the report, has netted off, which means that has been achieved thus far, which I think is a fantastic platform to consider the move to a full traded service for their legal team. And in the coming months we'll be looking at a paper, all of us as cabinet colleagues, about what that looks like and how that will shape the legal department in the council moving on to the future. So moving on to the medium-term financial strategy. So this isn't what happened yesterday or what's happening next week. This is very much in the longer term. As you'll see, this medium-term financial strategy assessment goes all the way up to 2020. You'll remember, cabinet colleagues, that we were looking at an 18.443 million pressure. Through a number of different constituency reasons, that pressure has now gone up to just short of 21 million. And just to take colleagues through some of that in terms of business rate difference, we also know about the Junction 30 business rates repeal. There's also the Thames oil port piece where the income expected from that hasn't materialised for the reasons that are quite obvious. Inflation, just very clear on this. Inflation, this is a medium-term and long-term view. This isn't what happened yesterday or last month or this month. So we have to take that into account. And of course, there's all manner of utilities in existing contracts which we have to consider. And it goes down to silly things like petrol and different contracts and all that sort of stuff. So we have to take into account for that. Lastly, the one just above the bold revised budget gap heading government grants. There's obviously some movement around the reduction of the new homes bonus, which is documented within the report. We know the direction of travel for the revenue support grant, and also we need to understand the full manifestation of the business rates review. So the report, the MTFS in itself operates on the basis of a default 3.99% increase in council tax, and the administration has been very clear the 2% is something we support wholeheartedly. It's new. And that money gets powered directly into that also from care services, which is absolutely critical given the amount of work that's required there. So as stated previously, Clean It, Cut It, Fill It is a pilot. The feedback has been positive. I was thankful to say the day after we got moved the travellers on off the Sandford Recreation Ground, and a couple of residents come up to me and made a point about it. For me, that's now the minimum standard. We want Thurrock to look like this all the time. But to do that, we need to look at things differently in terms of our finances, because the current finance plan doesn't allow us to do that. So therefore, as I've already said previously, I have asked our officers to go for, or to look and to work towards a further reaching savings target, despite the MTFS being expanded or increased slightly. That activity will not stop, and it won't be mitigated. We will still continue to look for more, so we can plough more back into the neighbourhoods of our borough. So we move on to section 3.3, which is around the council spending review. So for clarity, the council spending review is the mechanism which will realise a new Thurrock offer. It's a 3-year budget which will create and set up a 30-year borough. It's different from what we've done previous. So previously we've done the whole year by year salami slicing. Part of me thinks that previous conversations around cuts one day stop. We know that's absolute nonsense. We need to deal with the bigger financial structure issue, and that goes back to clean cut it fit. If we want to be doing the right things by our residents, we have to make sure that we prioritise the things that are important to them. So some people might call it zero-based budgeting. We're calling it the council spending review. There's a number of pieces of work, so all the service reviews that are going to happen. So every service is going to be reviewed over 3 years. There's a number of activities which they'll all be considering around income generation, achieving more, or the same for less. And there's a whole piece around demand management, clearly very pertinent to the social services department. It's a 3-year review up to March 2019. Let's be very clear. We cannot undertake such a comprehensive review of what the Thurrock offer is overnight. It would be a lie to suggest that any proposals are anywhere near completed, leader. Those proposals are being worked on, and it's a multi-body team, a transformation board, staff members involved, and that's multi-tiered across the organisation. Really keen on that, because it means that we're getting grassroots feel for what we need to do with our services, and that's going to reshape that budget. It's not a small feat, and in shaping a 30-year Thurrock, or a new Thurrock offer, we have to do it right, and we will do it right. Section 3.36 is the timetable. I shan't labour on that anymore, it's probably very obvious, which moves me on to section 3.14, which is the review of the general fund balance. The key message here, ladies and gentlemen, is that before we sort out the top structure of the building, we have to sort out the foundation. We have to make sure that the reserves are the right thing, and that is a pledge, and that's one of the first things I asked to happen when I assumed the role of Cabinet Member for Finance. We said we'd ask the officers to take a professional, comprehensive financial assessment. They have done that. It's in this report, and I'll go into it briefly. We know that 8 million was the level set for 6 years. It is reviewed periodically, but it hasn't been reviewed this comprehensively in some time. I'd like to see it happen more regularly. 3 years is what I'm currently thinking. So on the page overleaf from page 152, there is a breakdown summary of the reserves review headlines. I won't go through it all, it's there, it's pretty obvious to see. For clarity, the reserve, or general fund reserve, will increase in the next 3 years up to 9.26 million, and we'll be putting about 400k a year into that to build that up. The key message is this is our rainy day fund, and it's going to be done while the sun is shining. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is an overall summary of the direction of travel, so the medium-term situation financially, how we're going to reshape the new Thurrock offer through the council spending review, and it also closes the whole review, the review component of the reserves. Clearly it goes to full council for full recommendation approval, because it's a full council decision. But I think the Cabinet are keen to demonstrate its support for the review amount that has been proposed. So recommendations, Leader, 1.1 is as written, 1.2 likewise, just to document the funding for clean.
It's so clear and transparent, and I think it does you credit, Councillor. I'd like just something I was going to say about on page 143, when we look at the 352k mitigation in the adult social care, I thought a little bit of explanation, but though it is written in the report, unfortunately people present themselves, and we had some really challenging cases that have come through that have cost a lot more than what we had thought. Obviously we've had August and whatever with the heat and other things happening, but I think what I would like to say is that, by next year I would hope very much we have got rid of that necessarily posts, we have revisited everything, and it's not cutting services, it's actually working things differently. I don't like the word cut. We are working things differently and better services actually being delivered, and we're actually getting quite good feedback. So that's something I just wanted to tell you all. Thank you.
Councillor, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Liswell. Thank you for your contribution. I know adults and children social services are at the very forepart of what you're doing. It was like that before you was a cabinet member. I think in terms of openness and honesty, I think there is one thing that we do need to point out, that the children's services spend was last year 20% over its budget. Cases haven't gone down, as you've already articulated, they're only getting worse, and of course I'm at an arm's distance with this, but you see it closer to me. But I think what's important is the mitigating action which has happened, so the 2.6 million. There's a further 1.4 million, and the work that you're doing around in power and all that good stuff will contribute to that. There's also about 1.2 forecast next year as well. So I think you've risen to the challenge, and I thank you for making this debate more open and transparent, if I'm honest with you. We know it's a pressure, but we know we're not going to compromise social services.
Yeah, that was my main key point when I took on this role. My main concern is that every child in Park is safe, and that is what we aim for. There's nothing on KPs about what they have to do, all be safe, and it's the same with our adults, and we will deliver a good service, and we will be answerable. So thank you.
Any other member? Page 142, 2.2. Table shows pressures of 8.6 million have been identified. Now, I see 8.6 million, 8.6 million pounds of overspend. Doesn't quite add up in that many months. So, are you saying this year we've overspent by £8 million so far?
The financial year 15-16, the overspend was 5.6 million in children's services.
So you're saying effectively most of this is actually from the previous administration not having a balanced budget at the end of the year, but being overspent by a significant amount?
Well, I think yes, is the blunt answer. The answer that Sue has given, or Councillor Susan Little has given, should hopefully give you reassurance of the work that she's doing to bring that in control without compromising the offer. But it is a point I recognise.
Yeah, well, obviously, it's good to see it's coming, effectively coming down, but I'm still seeing 4.145, which is an awful lot of taxpayers' money. And what I'd like to see happen is a weekly update with you, so obviously this is your portfolio, but obviously your officers, just to outline how we're bringing this down. I wholeheartedly support every child needs to be safe, but that doesn't mean to say that we've got an endless bit of money that we can use to make sure that they are. We need to be managing this money really, really well. Obviously, year on year, we see the same service overspending. We brought it into next year's budget, it just seems to grow exponentially. So I think certainly for the next sort of 6 to 10 weeks, I'd like to see a weekly update on what's happening, where the money's going, what we're doing the work you're already doing to bring it down. I know that obviously, as an example, the unaccompanied asylum seekers, we're sort of doing all we can to get port of entry status, which will allow us to, or the government to distribute the children that get dumped off here at our service stations or coming through the port of entry, that we have to look after them so that we distribute it more evenly across the country. I find it unfair whilst it's gone down to 80.
It's 80 today.
Yeah. Once it's gone down, it's still, we're still doing we've still got a much larger proportion than other local authorities locally, and that's just unfair. So obviously I'd like to see an update on that and everything else we're doing just to try and keep these costs down. I know it's always that difficult thing, costs and safety, but it's also the inverse safety and cost. We need to make sure that we are delivering good value for what we're getting. Not only our children safe, but our taxpayers are not paying over the top to make sure that happens.
Thank you, Lee. Yes, and I totally agree with you, because that's exactly what I do. So all I have to do is review the figures on, though I was doing it fortnightly, except that I could do it weekly. Yes, we are down to 80 instead of 96 when I started with the asylum seekers. And yes, you were quite right. I did inherit a huge deficit to start with, and we were struggling. But you know, and we had to counter the Ofsted we had, which, to say the least, was poor at the time and needed improving. And we had to put in an action plan, we know where we're going with that, because that, regardless of money, to have a child safe is the most important thing in my mind. But equally, we have to, it was very obvious to us when we began looking at it, it's the amount of people coming through the front door. If we can stop that and make it so people actually be able to look after their children, support them, this has a knock-on effect all through their lives. Children don't want to come into care. You know, they would rather be with mum or mum and dad, whatever. They don't need to come to us. And if we can support that family right at an early stage, it will affect them all through life. It will affect their housing, their education, etc. And that's why it's been so important. I've also asked both Stephen, Metcalf and Jackie to lobby to have the children, perhaps unaccompanied asylum seekers, you know, spread more evenly through the you know, different places within Essex, because you look at Malden, they haven't got any, Southend, and last time I think had 3. So it does seem unfair. Unfortunately, we've got Thurrock service stations, and we have 3 ports, and you know, that isn't good enough, and it shouldn't all come down on Thurrock taxpayers. So we are working to say that, but at the end of the day, we still look at it as there's only 80 of those. For such a huge budget, there are other things we need to do differently. So it's not just those. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for that update. This is always the thing with finance reports. Finance being the lifeblood of the council is going to, whenever there's a problem, it's going to affect that particular portfolio. So portfolio holders have to come up with obviously real reasons and where we are. I like the whole idea of prevention being better than cure on this, as you quite rightly say. If the children not going to care, parents don't really want their children to go into care. So if we can stop that, as you say, it's going to massively reduce the cost and improve their life chances, which is exactly what we want them to do. It's okay them being safe now, but we want them to be safe now and also have those better life chances as they go through life. So in 20 years, 30 years, we're sitting here in this chair is not discussing another budget pressure because of problems that have been residual from when we were in charge.
One other factor is we actually need help from Thurrock residents themselves. As you know, and I'm always banging on about this, 3/4 of my looked after children are looked after outside the borough. That in itself is an extra cost. We really need residents to come forward and offer fostering homes, and I think that is a way forward. So perhaps that's doing a bit of advertising here. Anyone who feels the need could. Thank you.
I'm just becoming a little bit worried there. Actually, you haven't mentioned fostering for about 30 seconds, which is very rare for you, Sue. So
4 million apparently in terms of expenditure. If you move to the table at the top of 169, you'll see in total that the resources is 76. That's been agreed, and projected spending is about 70, which leads to 6.1 million. The detail for that is in Appendix A. I think what's key is understanding why 6 million is not going to be spent at the time that we thought it would be. And effectively, why I like this table in the middle is because it pretty much tells you the reasons why. It's not that projects are failing. It's not that we need extra capital or extra money to do them. It's merely reprofiling. And some of the bigger examples is around things like the Riverside Business Centre. So as can the colleagues be aware, there is a bit of a redesign going around for that, from what I understand. There's also internal things around the ground floor redesign. We need to make sure that what we do is done right, and it would be inappropriate use of taxpayers' money just to spend it on the huff, just to quickly get it done and dusted. With respect, that's what's led councils and governments to be in the mess that they're in 30 years later. And this administration is simply not going to do that. Schools are all documented, or there is a reference to it at section 3.4, but the more detailed report is further on as appendix number 3. Section 4 is all around the housing revenue account, which forecasts a 0 deficit in resources. There's an update around drawing on. So how do we measure whether we're doing everything we should in terms of capital spend? So there is an indicator of 10%, which is a nationally recognised indicator. As it stands at the minute, the hard paid, we are more or less at 10%. I have confidence there. So effectively, ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much it. It's just to give you that update, to go through the rephasing. I'm not going to go through every rephased project. It's in the appendices for all to see. Therefore, the recommendations 1.1 is to note the effective underspend of 6.94 million, seek to transition that into the year 2017-18. The constituency of that is the project phasing as discussed. There's also one thing to note around the academic school years, Leah. So obviously academic school years don't follow the same sort of model as ours do in terms of municipal financial years. And lastly, there's also decision making around some projects, that we talked about. HRA, no unused resources, recommendation 1.2, and the Cabinet is fully appraised of the existing school capital programme schemes for 2016-17, recommendation 1.3.
Thank you, Councillor Hebb. Any questions? Councillor Holden?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Hebb. I just want to add slight commentary to Appendix 3, the School Capital Programme. During full council, I explained the concept of the lobby unit that I set up and chaired directly to look at where the local authority could support certain free school bids and help support schools' ambitions to expand and work together to provide better provision for local children, and look at where we're using capital power and other powers to support those ambitions. I think quite importantly, last week myself and the Director of Children's Services met with representatives from the Department of Education and the Education Funding Agency and some significant education providers to talk about delivery, and critically we will be joined by Mr Cox to discuss how we actually make sure these projects are delivered. Councillor Hebb did make a good point in Appendix 2.2 that school years don't meet the same financial years, so making sure we're actually delivering on capital projects is essential. We're talking September to September, not April to April. But fundamentally, the reason we have this lobby unit and the reason we've got an ambitious plan of the type of schools we want to help develop in the borough is because we don't always want to be playing catch-up. We know we've got a problem with in-year admissions, and we don't want to just constantly be saying, well, we're trying to manage the demand. Yes, the local authority has got the statutory responsibility of making sure that all children who want to place at school, i.e. aren't being home educated, have got a suitable place to go to. But we've got that ambition to actually help schools deliver the sort of provision they want to make sure we're not always playing catch up. So I hope that provides Cabinet colleagues just with some reassurance that on the issue of school capital, we aren't just looking at the 16-17, we are looking at a very forward focused vision to make sure we've got the type of school provision across the entire borough that we want to see over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. Report. Note housing revenue account capital programme is projected to have no unused resources. It's not the fact that we just spend money until we run out. It is a case that they are delivered on budget and the right amount of properties that we're upgrading, or the right amount of upgrades that we're providing are actually there. Just that we're much better at balancing the books sometimes, because obviously it runs quite nicely with a financial year. So it makes it much easier. So it's not just a good thing that we always do it well in housing. It really is the fact that it's just a good model, and it's very easy or easier to control. So from that, we've got
this report, by way of introduction, is to go through the borrowing investment review that the Council undertook in 2015-16, or an update of progress has been. And also to have a look at the revenue around some of the Treasury transactions that have been undertaken in the year 2015-16. It's an outturn report, so clearly this is quite rearview mirror looking. So moving on to page 186. This page is all around the breakdown of the debt profile that the local authority has. About 355 million in total, around 160 million of that is in HRA, 130 are in general fund. Obviously, a lot of the general funds and stuff is around potential borrowing and capital programme works. I won't go into that anymore unless anyone wants to. It's probably a bit dry for a lot of people. In terms of understanding where we are in terms of our borrowing capabilities, etc., there is a mechanism called the capital financing requirement, which is a calculated measure, which come out of including reserves, is about 3.1 million. And there's accrued 16 million longer-term borrowing potential in the financial year. It was agreed, and the report asked us to make commentary on some of this, so I'll just stick my own opinion in some of this. I think it was the right thing to do, to not undertake more long-term borrowing. I think it's key that we do things in the right measures, and what we do has a sound plan behind it. There's nothing worse than asking for money with no plan as to what to do with it. It's horrendous. There's the whole piece around Gloriana, documented in section 3.6, so talking about the 8 million longer-term borrowing in there. Table 2 at the bottom of 187 goes through the phasing and debt maturity profile, if you like. So you imagine drawing a scored line between the years 1 to 25 and then 26 to 35 downward. That's the demarcation. So the 1 to 25 years on the average rate of 0.52 is all about cash flow. The PWLB, which is effectively HRA in common speak. There's the Gloriana set up, there's the Sept loan that we attracted, and there's also some money from High House that we have as well, and some temporary borrowing. Now what's important, going back to the interest rates piece, is that's where it's linked to. We're talking about the interest rate taking a medium term, longer term if you want it. It's linked to this. So because this is short term debt, we are more affected by interest rate changes, and so therefore it's the right thing to do to take a longer term view, as we've already talked about in my previous report. All the other stuff under my imaginary scored line of 26 to 35 years and under is all the longer term debt, and there's the constituency of it there. So the next report, 188, everyone knows I do like a graph. So this report pretty much goes around how much interest we've been paying on our interest rates, etc., but also the return on investment on some of the investment spend that we've been making. So in terms of interest rate paid, back in 2008 and 9, we were paying an interest rate of 5.15%. We're now down to about 1.48%, which is positive for us. Obviously, it gives us a lot of benefit. Again, to add to my running commentary, I think it's sensible that we keep a very hard eye on that. There is a lot of fluctuation. Who knows what will happen. UK in 2015, last September, was a vastly different place from where it is this year. So we have to be very acutely aware of that and keep our finger on the pulse of that. Positive one is around investment, so 1.77 in year 14-15, and in 2015-16 we report 2.88 million return on investment effectively. And some of that is around some investment that we've put into the church, charities and local authorities property fund, effectively. Effectively, it's a 5% return on investment, which is 2 million back straight into the general fund. And if you think about it, that's protecting services, and that's pro-revenue, and that's exactly where this administration has pledged to take this council. Moving on to page 189, in terms of investment transactions, the total amount of transactions of 64.8 million have been undertaken. The constituency of that is pretty much summarised in table 5 at the bottom of 189, and that's where the CCLA, the church, charities, local authorities fund, that's their contribution there. As I said, the return on investment on that is very favourable. And then lastly, there's the table on section 191 around their minimum revenue provision. Split into two different types, so external debt and investment income. Effectively, low interest rates are obviously of a benefit to us, and because of the amount of investment and MRP sort of work that's happened, we've gone from 7.725 in 14-15 down to 3.9, basically 4 million this year. Let's labour the point. Back to protecting services. Okay? Pro-revenue, pro-wealth generation is protecting services. It's not a dirty word, and it's something that we're going to do more and more of because it's the right thing to do. It's being commercial, and we're going to embrace it fully. So lastly, just to wrap up, in terms of recommendations, Leader, recommendations documented on page 1.85. Effectively, this report is reporting back to you all with the Cabinet the existing Treasury outturn for the previous year, 2015-16, as per their practice. And to add any commentary, I've added my commentary verbally for this item. If anyone else wants to, please feel free.
Any other members?
Unfortunately, but you have probably all read it, but I've put it in my own words, or not my own words, but my own words to start with. I'll try and explain it a little bit, because, when you say waiver of a contract or the fact we wouldn't be going out for tender, I've always got alarm bells. you all know, but this is a different process. The Better Care Fund is a really good news for Thurrock. It's a really good, feel-good story for Thurrock, as it promotes better working across the health and social services, and it will actually, make a much more unified service that residents receive.
Security announcement, the building will be closing in 15 minutes, that's 8 o'clock.
I hope so.
All right.
You're not allowed to talk as me, clearly.
You
take the time.
In
Just
March,
upstairs.
right, in March 2016, Cabinet approved the Better Care Fund, the Section 75 agreement. This is a legal agreement between the Council and Thurrock Clinical Commissioning Group and allows us to establish a pooled fund. The Council will be the host, i.e. we will hold the purse strings, which I thought was good news because I think 9 points of law is, possession. And we'll organise the pooled fund, which means that the Council will need to enter into contracts with the providers of the community health services, principally NEF and Sept. Cabinet's approval will be needed to agree not for a competitive procurement element and to award the contracts for these services in line with the Section 75 agreement. And the decision of the previous Cabinet in March 16. The reason this is coming to Cabinet now, because I couldn't quite work out why it was coming in late, was the Better Care Fund plans across the country and needed approval of the NHS England, and this was only received in late July, so we couldn't have moved any quicker. So this is the first time this has been able to come to Cabinet. The procurement regulations written in our Constitution states that Cabinet must approve award of contracts above 750,000. The rules also say that a report seeking Cabinet approval to award a contract shall include a statement from the responsible officer that in his opinion and wealth of expertise, the tender process has been fair and transparent in compliance with the relevant contract procedure laws. That's quite an important little bit. We had to have that approval. The contracts are already operating, but because of the delay in validating the Better Care Fund by NHS England, we have been unable to award them. Therefore, there is no opportunity to complete a competitive tendering process, as this would run out. It would be up to the end of the life of the contract. In view of this, procurement waiver is the only viable option we have. Legal and procurement colleagues have all agreed this is the best way forward, and they assure me we will not be at risk. But this is, a really good news story, even though I probably haven't sold it as well as it is, because it will actually support better services for our residents right across the borough, because we'll have tighter, closer working relationships. And it is good news. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Councillor Little. Members, any questions at all? Councillor Bobby.
Just to support what Councillor Little is asking for, waiving the procurement tender is a very sensible suggestion Councillor Little has put in front of us. The working relationship between the Council and the CCG is vital. We know we need to integrate care services, so we need to be able to establish a working relationship that can actually work in a speedy fashion. So the Better Care Fund in total is about £27 million worth of spending power. We need to be able to work with the CCG and with other health partners in a mighty fashion. We're actually going to drive the type of savings we need and get that type of health integration. So I think Councillor was asking for something that's quite sensible. But, the Better Care Fund is the start of a process, it's not the end destination. The whole point of the Better Care Fund is to make sure we've got great integration in health services, as Councillor Little has outlined. I had a visit to Basel Hospital a few weeks ago to look at the council-based services that are helping people get in and out of hospital quickly to help manage demand. Myself and the director are currently exploring, is there some scope for a local area coordination within the hospital to help manage that demand service. So that is an example of just the wider work that the Better Care Fund become a part of to make sure we've got a more integrated service. So it doesn't matter if a member of the public is seeing a hospital, is seeing a GP or is seeing the local authority. They've got that type of wraparound care. Care fund is a very important part of that, and it is important that we are able to move quickly in terms of contract procurement. So I think what Councillor Little has put in front of us is quite a sensible way forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Hayden.
To be fair, Councillor Hope covered everything I was going to say.